Today's data science interview question comes from Facebook. It's called popularity percentage. All right, today's data science interview question comes from Facebook. It's called popularity percentage. The question reads, find the popularity percentage for each user on Facebook. The popularity percentage is defined as the total number of friends the user has divided by the total number of users on the platform. Then convert into a percentage by multiplying by 100. Output each user along with their popularity percentage. Order records in ascending order by user ID. All right, so the first thing I want to do is explore the data sets. I have a table called Facebook Friends here. So if I click on the preview button, so I essentially have two columns in this table here, user 1 and user 2. We can read this table essentially as user 1 being the user list and user 2 being the friends of the user. So just think of user 1 as users and user 2 as friends of the user. All right, now with an understanding of our data, let's write out what the approach is going to look like. So I'm actually going to start with the last step in this implementation. It's actually the popularity percentage, right? So that's what we need to implement here. It says the popularity percentage is defined as the total number of friends the user has divided by the total number of users on the platform. So I'm just going to copy and paste the definition of popularity percentage. So I know that essentially what I want to get is the total number of friends the user has, right, divided by, I'm just going to remove that and put a division sign, the total number of users on the platform. That's essentially what I need to do to get to the popularity percentage. So some of my work is going to involve figuring out the total number of friends the user has. The other part of my work is going to be calculating the total number of users on the platform. So this question is rated as hard, not because of any advanced or complex functions that we're going to be using, but it's hard because we have to wrap ourselves around how we're going to manipulate the data set so that we can get both the total number of users on the platform and the total number of friends a user has, both together in one SQL query. So I'm going to start with calculating the total number of users on this platform. All right. So what that's going to look like is essentially using a union to union user 1 and user 2 together so that I get a list of all the users on the platform. And then I'm going to only take the unique users. So a union will actually deduplicate any users that are repeated throughout the list. I can also force it by using a distinct as well. So I'll show you that when we start coding. The second thing I want to do is calculate the total number of friends the user has. And this one's a little bit more complicated to implement, but it's essentially still going to be using a union. And I'll be also leveraging both columns. And I'll explain what I mean by user 1 and user 2 and user 2 and user 1 when I start coding. But this is actually one of the tricks to this question. It's what makes it difficult and hard. So I want to devote some time to an in-depth explanation of what I'm implementing when I start coding. So now that we have the total number of users on the platform and the total number of friends a user has, we actually have the numerator and the denominator. So I'm actually going to now just put this at the bottom because we're going to then use these two queries here as subqueries and then implement the popularity percentage here. So this is a very high level rough draft to the approach, but let's actually start coding so that we can add more nuances to this rough outline. All right, so the first thing we want to do is calculate the total number of users on the platform using a union for user 1 and user 2. So I'm going to copy this step right here. And in order to do this, it's really just a select user 1 from Facebook Friends, and then union select user 2 from Facebook Friends. So what I also need to add in here is a distinct That way we just have unique users. So all I'm really doing here is creating one list of all users from user 1 and user 2 columns, because I don't necessarily know if the user 1 column actually has a list of all of the users, right? So some users could appear in user 2 that are not appearing in the user 1 column. So in order to get a master list of all the users, I want to make sure I can do that using a union clause. And I'm going to use a union instead of a union all, because a union will deduplicate all repeated users that would come up between user 1 and user 2. All right, so if I run this code, I get a master list of all of the users between user 1 and user 2 columns. So the last step is to really count the total number of users on the platform, right? And so this will become a subquery, and I'm just going to implement a count function to be able to count all the users on the platform. So select count star as all users. From the subquery here, what I'll do is I'll call this subquery total unique users. So let's just run this code to see if it works. And it does. It gives us 9 users. And so number 1 is essentially done. So now the next step is to find the total number of friends a user has. All right, and so this is a lot more complicated. What I'm going to do is just comment out this part right here. So, and I'll use that later. But what we want to do now is work on step number 2. So in order to calculate the total number of friends a user has, we're going to need 2 columns. One column is all of the users, and then the next column is all of the friends the user has. So that's going to look like this. Select user 1 and user 2 from Facebook friends. Then I'm going to implement a union here, and I'm going to say select user 2 as user 1 and user 1 as user 2 from Facebook friends. Let's just run this query here, and then I'll explain what I mean by this. So we do get something here, right? And you might be confused as to why I actually implemented this code right here, where I'm just exchanging user 2 for user 1, and then exchanging user 1 for user 2. So let me present a graphical explanation of what's actually being done in this query here. So for example, say that you have a table with user 1 and user 2, and you have Tom and Alice, and then Alice is friends with Tom, and Alice is friends with Bob, right? So you can think about this as the user, and then you can also think of user 2 as friends of the user. So these 3 rows is essentially this part of the query. It's the top part of the query. And so when I union with this bottom part of the query here, what you then have is this. So you have 3 more rows. You essentially have Alice as a user who is friends with Tom, and Tom who is friends with Alice, and then Bob who's friends with Alice as well, right? And you note that we use the union, so it's going to deduplicate all of the repeated rows. So that means that this row right here is removed. It means that this row right here is removed. So now you have essentially 4 rows, 3 unique users, and their friends, right? And so this is actually a complete list of all of the users in the user 1 table, and a list of all of the users' friends in the user 2 table. And that's what this query actually does. So we're going to be able to find the total number of friends a user has using this query here. And that's what makes this question difficult, because you kind of need to wrap your head around how to manipulate and rearrange the data to be able to then calculate the total number of friends a user has. All right, so I have these 2 steps done, and now what's last is to actually implement this percentage calculation. It's the total number of friends a user has, so this bottom portion right here, divided by the total number of users in the platform. So that's going to look like this. These two are going to be subqueries. So I'm going to just delete the comment here. So I'll have select, and I'm just going to, for now, put a star there from this query here. So TUU as total unique users, that's my alias. I'm going to do a join, and then this bottom part becomes a subquery. I'm just going to call this users underscore friends as the alias. So now you have to think about what the common key is going to be, right? One is just a count, so it's just a number, and the other one has two rows where it's user one and user two. So what is the common key here? Well, we're actually going to be implementing a 1 equals 1. All it actually does, it puts all of the columns together. So it basically concatenates all three columns together. So if I run this query here, it's going to look like this. So you see in this output, we have all users, which is basically 9, right? And it's just 9 repeated the entire way down. And then we have user 1, which is essentially a list of all of the users. And then we have user 2, which is a list of all of the users' friends. So this is right here, the numerator, and this is the denominator here. And so now we have everything we need to implement this percentage formula. And that's the next step here. So now we want to implement this percentage formula here, and we want to implement that on a user level. So that means every user gets a popularity percentage, right? So what that's going to look like is this. So since user 1 contains a list of all the users, we're going to use that as the first column. Next, we want to implement this total number of friends a user has. So all we're going to do is just count the number of rows that are grouped by user 1. So what that actually does is, if you take a look at the user 1 column here, ID 1, we'll count the number of rows that are grouped by ID 1, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So that should return, this count star should return a 5 because it's grouped by user 1, ID 1. All right? And then the second part is the denominator, the total number of users on the platform. What we want to do is pick from this query right here. So it's select count star. What we're actually grabbing is the number from all users, which is 9. All right? So what that's going to look like is, I'll do a division. I'm grabbing from this table here, TUU, and then I'm grabbing this column right here, which is all users. And because this is a function, I'm just going to also implement a function here. I'm going to say just max. You could probably use min or average. Doesn't really matter because all of the numbers here are the same. Then I'm just going to convert this into a float because we are taking a percentage. So an integer divided by an integer is an integer. We want to change this to a decimal or a float to actually get a number that's less than 1. All right, so we have this now. So now let me finish it off with a group by user 1 and then an order by user 1 in ascending order. All right, so let's just test this. See if it works. Yep, we get the user list here in ascending order of 1 to 9, and then we get the percentage. But we haven't multiplied it by 100 yet, or actually given this column a name. So let's just do that real quick. As popularity percentage, and then multiply this by 100. Run this code. So a list of all the users and their popularity percentage. Let's actually check to see if we have this right. So it looks like our solution is correct. So again, this was marked as a hard question, not because of the complexity of the functions used in the SQL query, but because it's actually a little bit difficult to wrap your head around how you need to manipulate the data in order to perform this calculation here. So I hope all of that makes sense. If you have a question, please leave a comment in the discussion forum.